Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode number 120, and for this episode, I'm going to be circling back to one of my favorite concepts that I've done on my channel, which is the vocal house or the house vocal classics series. I always feel like house music is better with vocals. It's just got that uplifting vibe in most cases, and for me, I always talk about this where I like to ride around in the car and I listen to the sets that I make and I listen to my favorite tracks, and there's nothing better than riding around with my windows down and the music cranked up probably to inappropriate levels for my ears, and just singing along to a great house music tune. So I have 5 picks for you today out of my house section of my collection that I think you guys will enjoy. There's a couple of classics in here, and there's a couple of one-off, one-hit wonders that you may not be familiar with, and those are some of the ones that are the ones that I enjoy most presenting on this channel, because I like surprising people and causing people to think, well, shoot, I didn't know about that one. Where'd you come up with that one? So let's get started. My first pick for you in the one-hit wonder, one-off department is this. This is a track called Sunset, and it's by an artist, Lifelike, and I do think this is a little bit of a one-hit wonder. Lifelike has other productions as well, but this one I think is the ultimate sleeper hit out of Lifelike's catalog. His name is Laurent Heinrich, and he's a French producer, and in this record here, you're getting, I think, a little bit of a slightly commercial leaning record. If you think of somebody that would be a prominent house music producer that's commercial leaning but also kind of club friendly, think of somebody like Michael Gray, who back in the day did a breakout track in the early or maybe 2007-ish. He did a track called Borderline that I thought was really catchy and fun. So anyways, this is from 2009, and if you listen to this track, it's warm, it's very synthy, it's slightly cheesy, but not in an overly cheesy way, and the vocal in here is really just something nice. So it's describing a sunset, and the way that the girl sings the vocal is so impassioned and so emboldened. It's just something that has really stood the test of time in my catalog. At one point, I thought about selling this, and then I got to the point where I was like, nah, I think this is actually going to age really well, and it really has. It's been a classic. Here is a track that is not a one-hit wonder in any regard. This is possibly one of the best-selling house tracks, house records of all time. It is the Nightcrawlers, Push the Feeling On. This came out in 1992, and it is an absolute monster classic of a house record. I think This had a lot of commercial crossover appeal. It got a lot of radio play. I know my friend Ryan Bauer, who I interviewed on my From the Booth series, said that this is his favorite house record ever. He's not much of a sing-along vocal guy, so for him to really be into a house record, it's really saying something about the music here. The one of the things that I noticed about this track is the number of times that lead little bloopy, hooky, innocent sounding synth that you hear in here. I've heard many people try to reuse that synth in a better way, right? I've heard it appear in pop music, different remixes, especially in the last 5 years. You hear these like radio hits by artists that are sort of trying to break out, and they're trying to trigger that sense of a familiar sound in a new record by using something that you kind of they use a synth like this, and then they try to like get your brain to think, oh, this sounds familiar, right? That they're kind of like legally leeching off of a classic sound. But to be honest with you, when I hear these takeoffs of Push the Feeling On, none of them really get it done. I have never heard this synth, this plugin be used in a way that was better than it is in Push the Feeling On. And there's different versions of the record, or many different remixes and slight alterations of the track, but I think everybody, if they're being honest, would acknowledge that the MK, the Mark Kitchen Dub of Doom, is the only track, the only version of this that anybody needs. So Nightcrawlers, Push the Feeling On, MK Dub of Doom, absolute monster. You got to have this in your catalog. In the early 90s, Everything But the Girl came out with what I consider to be their biggest hit of all time, which is their track Missing. I remember listening to it in the car in my high school years, and it would come on the radio, and it was always something that if that was on the radio, there's no way I was changing the channel, or the station rather, once I got to Missing. It was, in hindsight, a early proto house release, and it had tons of crossover appeal. I think the main appeal of the record is Tracy Thorn's vocal, and if you look at how that vocal is written and some of the cleverness and the slickness and how succinct it is, even the line I miss you like the deserts miss the rain, that's perfect. It's so perfectly compact and well written, and those are the types of lyrics that you would hear in the 90s and the 2000s that a lot of songwriters, not there's some good songwriters out there now still, but they don't go to that level, right? When they're writing, they don't go to that poetic, elegant, sophisticated level. A lot of times it's like let's repeat the same phrase 4, 8, or 16 times, and you're sitting there thinking like, guys, this was the best you could come up with in the studio. Like I could have, if I was sitting there with them, I could have wrote some variation where at least on the 3rd and 6th time the word altered or switched to something else that rhymed with the original phrase. But they're not even doing that. Sometimes the lyrics get so stupid, it's like, I can't believe that this even made the cut for the radio. So when I listen to Missing, it's a great I think, a great time capsule of house music, commercial music, and possibly the peak of Everything But the Girl. Around that time, Everything But the Girl had also released popular tracks like Five Fathoms, which is another one where Tracy really shows off her vocal abilities, and they had the track Wrong. And speaking of Missing, Wrong, and Five Fathoms, they're all featured here on this Adapt or Die series, which came out in about 2005. So this is just club-friendly remixes of the Everything But the Girl tracks that you are probably most familiar with. In particular here, Missing appears on the A side, and it's remixed by an artist named C.L. McSpadden. And C.L. McSpadden left. This is almost like a re-edit. Back in the day, in the early 2000s and 90s, the remixes were very often just re-edits of the original track. Like they worked with all the original stems and the original sounds. So that's what you're getting here. You're not getting a whole host of new elements coming in and sort of confusing you. As soon as this track starts, even though it's 3 minutes longer than the original, you know that this is Everything But the Girl Missing. Like this has crowd recognizable familiarity in it. So if you want a nice club friendly 7-minute version of Missing, this is what you need. One of my favorite house tracks from 1996 is this one here that has been remixed, reissued, re-released many times. This is Marshall Jefferson featuring the Noosa Heads, and it's called Mushrooms. And everybody that has been hanging around in the house music scene for a long time is familiar with the vocal. The vocal was actually done and written by Marshall Jefferson, and he describes a scene where he went to a botanical garden of some sort, and he had his girlfriend with him, and his girlfriend convinces him to take a mushroom at this garden, and he has this experience that he details in the track in this like very well delivered monologue. What I think is funny about the monologue is it's almost ironic that the girl that convinces him to take the mushroom is in the beginning of the fantasy, but by the time the fantasy ends, Marshall describes his girlfriend fading away, and some other girl that was really pretty comes into the fantasy, and Marshall quote unquote plays tongue hockey with her. I always crack up when he delivers that line, because I think it was actually called tonsil hockey, but he called it tongue hockey. It was, you could tell he was just sort of like ad-libbing when he did the vocal, but it's a very interesting and entertaining vocal. And something else that's really interesting about this versus the Noosa Heads. When you go and look and see who the Noosa Heads are, it blew my mind to see that it's Chris Liebing. Chris Liebing is a Noosa Head. Chris Liebing, the protege of Speedy J, that is known for hard pounding techno, that in the early 2000s was just dropping high energy 134 and up techno, that is known for looping 1 beat, 2 beat, 4 beat, and 8 beat loops, and playing marathon skull crushing bassline ridden sets, is originally a Noosa Head that was featured on one of the most prominent house tracks of all time. And for the remix, there's many remixes to choose from in the Mushrooms series, right? You could go with the original, Nobody Would Fault You there. I chose the Salt Lake City Orchestra or the Salt City Orchestra version because I just love the minimal vibe of it. It actually comes off as early minimal house, and I was so surprised when I listened to it and I looked at the date. I said, "Boy, that sounds like something that Peter Grumich would make, or maybe even slight flavors of Ricardo Villalobos." There's just something wooden and talky and um, kind of like strange and druggy about the percussion in the track, and it was just really interesting to me to hear that coming out in 1998 is when that Salt City Orchestra version dropped, and I really think because of those elements and that vibe that they created, it was way ahead of its time.
I was walking on clouds. They were beautiful clouds. And my girlfriend was talking to me while I was walking on the clouds. And everything felt beautiful. I almost felt like I didn't have any feet. No floor under me. It's beautiful. We looked in each other's eyes on top of these clouds. And we were talking with each other, but our mouths weren't open. Then all of a sudden, she let me go, but I didn't fall. I floated, but I was farther away from her.
And my last pick for you today is from 2007. This is a track that I discovered because back in the day I used to buy almost everything that Danny Howells put out. So this is Carl Kennedy featuring the M.A.M.P Project, and the track is called Ride the Storm. Now, Danny Howells and Dick Trevor did a version on the B-side, their Kinky Funk remix. If you're a Danny Howells collector or fan, you'll know that Danny Howells did many Kinky Funk versions of tracks. There's actually a track called Kinky Funk, and he has other remixes that have that same type of vibe and aesthetic in them. But I ended up gravitating towards the more obvious commercial M.A.M.P Project version on the A side. And I love the vocal in this. It's inspirational. And on a personal note, this vocal came to me at a time in my life where I was dealing with some really heavy stuff. I had some post-traumatic stress disorder that was undiagnosed from years and years before, earlier in my life, and it had kind of like lurked in the background in my psyche, and then one day it just sort of came into full bloom, and I was confused by it because I went from basically feeling normal and feeling like everything was okay to go into a phase where I was having anxiety and panic attacks, and nocturnal panic attacks too, and I couldn't figure out like where the problem was coming from. So the lyrics in the track Ride the Storm were something that I would often listen to get myself through some of the harder days. If I was having a day where I was feeling like really almost like inconsolably anxious, Ride the Storm, life goes on. Those were some of the lyrics that would really kind of get to my heart and give me the energy to keep going. hope you guys like that track. And one thing I'll warn you, the intro and the outro, it's long enough to mix out of, but it's not long enough to dawdle. So if you're doing a blend on that, just kind of be up and be on it and get out of the track, because it will end somewhat abruptly. I think it could have been edited a little bit more DJ friendly, but still great vocal there. All right, that's all for the House Vocal Classics Part 4. I hope you guys enjoyed these tracks. If any of these tracks remind you of any other records in your collection, please feel free to make recommendations and comments down below. I always enjoy reading your guys' comments. That's all, and take care.